The sun hung low over the desert, painting the endless dunes in molten gold and fiery amber. Heat shimmered off the sand, creating illusions of distant lakes, mirages that beckoned the weary traveler. Among the undulating waves of sand, a solitary figure moved with confident grace, the soft whisper of silk against her skin marking her presence. Her name was Isabella, a woman whose elegance was matched only by her curiosity, and the desert had become her temporary haven, a place where desire seemed as endless as the horizon. She had come seeking solitude, a respite from the rigid order of her life in the city. Yet, as she traversed the vast expanse, she sensed she was not alone. There was a tension in the air, an energy that teased the senses and whispered promises of danger and delight. Sand shifted under her feet as a sudden breeze carried a scent spicy, smoky, undeniably masculine. Her pulse quickened. She turned, scanning the horizon, and that's when she saw him. Darian stood on a nearby dune, his silhouette sharp against the amber sky. His dark hair caught the sun's last rays, and his eyes, an unsettling, magnetic shade of green, locked onto hers. He moved effortlessly down the slope, each step purposeful, as though the desert itself bent to accommodate him. He exuded confidence, danger, and allure all at once. Isabella felt a shiver trace her spine. She knew that encounter would change her journey forever. As he approached, the wind carried the subtle rustle of his loose linen shirt, hinting at the toned muscles beneath. Darian's gaze never wavered, and when he spoke, his voice was deep, smooth, and hypnotic. "You're far from anywhere safe," he said, a faint smile curving his lips. "What brings a woman like you to a desert like this?" Isabella's lips curved, a playful defiance sparkling in her eyes. "Seeking adventure. Or perhaps, someone interesting to share it with," she replied, letting her voice hold just enough teasing warmth to make him lean closer, intrigued. He stopped a mere pace away, the heat of the desert mixing with the heat radiating between them. The air seemed to pulse, carrying an electric charge that made her skin tingle. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on her lips, the curve of her neck, the sway of her hips. It was not crude, but deliberate, a silent declaration that he saw her entirely. "You may have found more than you expected," Darian murmured, his words brushing against her ear like a delicate caress. She felt the subtle vibration of his voice through the warm air, a magnetic pull that drew her closer, though her mind screamed caution. Despite the sun's dying light, shadows grew long and intimate around them. Isabella felt the world narrow, leaving only the heat of the sand beneath her, the wind teasing her hair, and the man who had so suddenly appeared in her path. A playful smile tugged at her lips. "And what is it that you expect to find?" "Perhaps someone bold enough to match me," he said, his gaze holding hers like a promise of untold pleasures. "Someone who isn't afraid of the unknown, or of desire." Her pulse raced. Desire was a dangerous game, and yet, standing there on the warm dunes with Darian so near, she felt herself drawn to it, to him, as if the desert itself conspired to strip away all pretenses. The golden light seemed to wrap around them, bathing them in a private, intoxicating glow. For a moment, silence fell, heavy and potent. The only sound was the whisper of the wind through the dunes, carrying with it an almost tangible promise: something thrilling, something forbidden, was about to ignite. Isabella met Darian's gaze, daring him and herself to step further into the heat of the desert night. The sun finally sank below the horizon, leaving the sky a tapestry of violet and rose. In the growing shadows, desire became a pulse, a rhythm that matched their quickening hearts. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a world suspended in amber light and anticipation. And in that suspended moment, Isabella knew that the encounter had only just begun. The dunes were no longer silent. They held a secret, and that secret shimmered with the promise of seduction, a fire that neither of them could resist. The desert sun rose harshly the next morning, burning gold across the dunes, yet the memory of last night's encounter lingered on Isabella's skin like a secret warmth. She moved carefully through the sand, the grains hot under her bare feet, and though the heat was unforgiving, she could not shake the thought of Darien, the way he had appeared like a shadow out of the shifting sands, the intensity of his gaze, the subtle promise in his voice. She had told herself she came seeking adventure, not temptation, yet she could feel desire pulsing in her veins like a living thing. The wind carried whispers over the dunes, teasing her senses, and she found herself scanning the horizon, searching for that magnetic presence once again. It was then that she spotted him, a solitary figure moving with effortless grace across the golden slopes, as if he were part of the desert itself. Darien's eyes caught hers immediately, and a slow, knowing smile curved his lips. There was an intimacy in the way he approached, a silent acknowledgement of the night shared and the unspoken tension that simmered between them. Isabella felt her pulse quicken. She wanted to turn away, to retreat into safety, yet her body betrayed her, leaning slightly forward as if drawn by a force stronger than reason. "You came back," he observed, his voice low, rich, carrying the faint trace of amusement and something more dangerous beneath. "I did," she replied, her tone playful, tinged with a daring she did not entirely feel. "Perhaps I needed to see if the desert holds more than solitude." Darien closed the distance, his presence overwhelming, a magnetic pull that seemed to bend the very air between them. His gaze lingered on her face, tracing the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the delicate sweep of her collarbone peeking above her blouse. "Solitude can be lonely, but not always," he said, letting his words hang, weighted with implication. The wind shifted, sweeping strands of her hair across her face, and he reached out, brushing them aside with a gentle, deliberate touch. The contact was brief, but it sent a shiver down her spine, igniting the fire that had begun the night before. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The heat of the desert sun seemed nothing compared to the heat rising between them. "You don't seem afraid," Darien said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Most would run after meeting me like this." "I'm not most," she answered, letting a faint smile curve her lips. "Perhaps. I'm intrigued. Or reckless." He laughed softly, the sound low and magnetic, vibrating against her chest. "Recklessness can be dangerous, and exhilarating." His eyes darkened with intent, and Isabella felt her resolve melting like sand under the noon sun. She was drawn to him, compelled by something primal, an electric current of desire that pulsed between them with each measured step he took closer. The dunes rose around them, creating a private world of shifting gold, isolated from the rest of the harsh, unforgiving desert. Darien's presence dominated the space, and Isabella sensed that every movement, every glance, was a deliberate dance, a game she was powerless to resist. She could feel the weight of his attention, the subtle power in the brush of his hand against hers, and she longed for more, even as the rational part of her mind urged caution. "Show me something of the desert," she said, surprising herself with the edge of command in her tone. "Take me to a place where only the dunes and the wind exist." Darien's lips quirked into a knowing smile, and he extended his hand, the invitation unmistakable. "Then follow me." "But be warned," he murmured, his voice a caress, "once you step into this world, there may be no turning back." Isabella hesitated only for a heartbeat, then allowed herself to take his hand. The moment their fingers intertwined, a current seemed to spark between them, a silent promise of intimacy, danger, and unspoken desire. Step by step, they climbed a dune together, sand giving way beneath their feet, until the world fell away, leaving only the heat of the sun, the whisper of the wind, and the undeniable pull of one body toward another. As they reached the crest, the desert stretched endlessly before them, a sea of golden waves under a brilliant sky. The isolation heightened the tension, and Isabella could feel the weight of Darian's gaze upon her, the intensity of his presence closing the space between them. Words became unnecessary, their eyes spoke volumes, carrying promises of temptation and seduction yet to come. For the first time, Isabella realized that the desert was no longer just a place of escape. It had become a stage, and the dance between them had only just begun. Every grain of sand, every gust of wind, seemed charged with possibility, and she felt the thrill of anticipation coiling in her stomach. Darian reached out once more, brushing a strand of hair from her face, letting his fingers linger on her cheek. "Do you feel it?" he asked softly. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling slightly, though not from fear. "I feel everything." The sun blazed down, but it was nothing compared to the fire building between them, a slow, irresistible blaze that promised the night would bring secrets, desires, and temptations far hotter than the desert sun. As the sun sank behind the jagged horizon, painting the dunes in molten shades of crimson and violet, the desert transformed from a scorching expanse into a world of mystery and seduction. The heat of the day lingered in the sand, releasing a faint warmth into the cool evening air. Isabella followed Darian through the rolling dunes, their footsteps leaving temporary imprints that the wind would soon erase, a fleeting testament to their shared journey. They reached a small natural hollow where the wind had carved a private enclave among the dunes. Here, the desert felt intimate, as though it existed solely for them. Darian knelt and set down a woven mat, its fabric soft against the coarse sand. From a small satchel he had carried, he produced a lantern whose golden glow flickered like the promise of secrets waiting to be revealed. The gentle light cast shadows across his sharp features, emphasizing the intensity in his eyes, the line of his jaw, the subtle curve of his lips. Isabella felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from the sun, but from the charged proximity of this man who seemed to embody the desert itself. "Sit," he said, his voice low and inviting. She obeyed, the mat cool beneath her, though the warmth of the sand seeped through like an invisible caress. The lantern flickered, and for a moment, she could see the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his lips, one that promised mischief, danger, and desire in equal measure. Darian settled across from her, close enough that the brush of their knees sent small, electric shocks up her legs. His gaze never wavered, and Isabella felt as though he could see every hidden thought, every secret longing. The air between them hummed with a tension that was neither polite nor subdued. It was raw, alive, and impossible to ignore. "You've drawn me into this desert," he said softly, "but it seems I've been drawn into you even more." His words were deliberate, measured, yet laden with unspoken invitation. He leaned closer, just enough for the warmth of his presence to brush against her skin, and Isabella felt a tremor run through her. "Perhaps the desert has its own way of revealing desires," she whispered, her voice low, trembling with anticipation. "Or perhaps it only magnifies what we already carry inside." Darian's eyes darkened, a slow, deliberate intensity that made her pulse race. He reached out, his fingers brushing along the back of her hand, lingering just enough to make her acutely aware of every nerve ending. The contact was light, almost casual, but it sent a ripple of heat coursing through her body, a warning and an invitation all at once. The wind whispered through the dunes, carrying the faint scent of wild desert blooms, mingling with the subtle spice of his cologne. It was intoxicating, heady, like a potion meant to ensnare the senses. Isabella felt herself leaning closer, drawn to the magnetism he radiated. She could see the play of light across his features, the shadow that hinted at mystery, the softness beneath the intensity, a contradiction she found impossible to resist. "Tell me," he murmured, his voice almost a caress, "what do you crave in a place like this?" Isabella hesitated, the heat in her chest matching the fire in her veins. "I crave freedom," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Freedom to feel, to explore, to surrender to something I can't define yet." Darian's smile deepened, slow, knowing, as if he had been expecting this answer. "Then surrender, Isabella," he said, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was intimate, lingering, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "Let yourself feel everything, the desert, the night, the possibility of what we could be." Her breath caught as he leaned closer, the faint brush of his lips near her ear sending sparks of anticipation rippling through her. She felt her body respond, a magnetic pull toward him that defied reason. The fire that had been smoldering since their first encounter now threatened to blaze out of control, a storm that could not be contained by distance or decorum. Darian's hand traced lightly along her arm, a touch that was teasing, gentle, yet impossible to ignore. Every nerve seemed alive, attuned to his presence, and Isabella realized that desire was no longer a whisper but a tangible force pressing between them. The desert night seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, each grain of sand beneath them a silent witness to the growing tension. Finally, he lowered his voice to a near growl. "The night is ours, Isabella. Let it guide us, let it teach us what we cannot resist." And in that suspended, intimate moment, she did not resist. The desert, the stars above, the warm glow of the lantern, they all seemed to conspire to pull her closer, to erase the distance between them. The dance of seduction had begun in earnest, and both knew it would leave them changed, consumed by a heat that was as relentless as the dunes themselves. The desert night wrapped around them like velvet, cool and intoxicating, yet the heat between Isabella and Darian burned brighter than the lingering warmth of the sand. Stars stretched endlessly overhead, twinkling like distant flames, and the quiet hum of the desert created a rhythm that matched the racing of her heart. Each movement, each glance between them, was charged with unspoken desire. Darian leaned back slightly, letting his eyes roam over her with the ease of a predator surveying its prize, and Isabella felt herself tremble under his gaze. It wasn't crude or aggressive, it was deliberate, teasing, filled with a slow, tantalizing promise. "The desert holds illusions," he said softly, "but some things here are real. Dangerous. Irresistible." She tilted her head, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "And which am I?" she asked, her voice a mixture of daring and flirtation, each word a subtle invitation. His smile was slow, predatory, and it sent a shiver crawling down her spine. "Both," he murmured, leaning closer so the tip of his nose brushed against her temple. His breath was warm, scented faintly with spice, and it made her dizzy with anticipation. "You're a challenge, Isabella. A temptation. And I intend to explore every part of you that the desert hides from the sun." The intensity of his gaze was mesmerizing, drawing her in with the inexorable pull of gravity. She felt the heat of his hand as it brushed against hers, fingers intertwining as naturally as though they had been forged to fit together. Every contact was electric, a spark igniting a slow, delicious burn that crept through her veins. "You speak as though you've tamed the desert," she teased, letting her fingertips trace the back of his hand, "yet it's the desert that tempts you, just as it tempts me. Darian chuckled softly, the sound low and velvety, vibrating against her senses. Perhaps it does, he admitted, letting his thumb circle hers in a languid, deliberate rhythm. Or perhaps, it's you who tempts me, and the dunes are merely witnesses. She shivered, leaning closer, drawn to the intensity that radiated from him. The flickering lantern cast shadows that danced across their faces, highlighting the subtle flush of her cheeks, the curve of her lips, the glint of fire in his eyes. The desert seemed to hold its breath around them, the night air charged with anticipation, as though even the wind understood the slow, deliberate seduction playing out on the sand. I feel like I'm suspended, Isabella whispered, voice trembling slightly, between reality and something more, something impossible. Darian's smile deepened, and he lowered his voice to a velvet murmur. The impossible is often the most exquisite, he said, brushing a stray strand of hair from her neck. His fingers lingered there, light as silk, and the contact sent a shiver coursing through her body. Tonight, the desert allows us to forget the world beyond these dunes. To surrender, to feel. Isabella's breath caught. Every word, every movement, seemed designed to unravel her, to strip away caution and leave only desire in its wake. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, the slope of his shoulder, and she felt the tension between them coil tighter, like a spring ready to release. The night deepened, and the desert grew quieter, the vast expanse around them creating a sense of isolation that only amplified the intimacy of the moment. Every brush of his hand, every subtle shift closer, was a challenge and an invitation all at once. The playful teasing between them had evolved into a slow, deliberate dance, a game of anticipation and surrender, one that neither could resist. Darian's lips hovered near her ear, and his words were a whisper against her skin. The dunes are patient, but desire is not. Do you feel it, Isabella? The way the night bends around us, the way the desert itself seems to urge us closer. Yes, she breathed, heat rising to her cheeks. I feel it, and I can't resist. He leaned back slightly, letting the tension build, letting the desert and the night work their magic. Her pulse raced, her senses heightened, every nerve alive with anticipation. The dunes shimmered around them, a private mirage, and in the silence, the unspoken promise hung between them like a tangible force, one that demanded surrender, intimacy, and passion. And in that suspended, starlit moment, Isabella knew that the game had escalated beyond teasing and flirtation. The desert night was theirs, a playground of desire and temptation, and the fire between them threatened to blaze beyond the bounds of control. The dunes whispered secrets, the wind carried the promise of indulgence, and the stars above bore silent witness to the slow, irresistible pull drawing them together, inch by tantalizing inch. The first rumble of thunder rolled across the distant dunes, low and ominous, vibrating through the sands beneath Isabella's feet. The desert sky, once a tapestry of stars, had darkened into a brooding canvas of slate and charcoal. The wind shifted sharply, whipping through the dunes and tugging at her hair, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone and anticipation. Darian's eyes met hers, a spark of exhilaration and something darker flickering within. A storm, he murmured, voice low, almost a growl. And we're right in its path. Isabella felt a thrill ripple through her, a mixture of apprehension and excitement. The desert had already seduced her, but now it seemed intent on testing the edges of danger and desire simultaneously. Then we'd better find shelter, she said, though her tone betrayed a spark of anticipation. The storm was not merely a threat, it was a catalyst, heightening every nerve, every pulse, every sensation between them. Darian's hand brushed hers as he offered it, their fingers tangling effortlessly. "Follow me," he said, and together they moved swiftly across the dunes, the wind tugging at their clothing and the grains of sand scouring their skin. Despite the rush, the closeness between them sent sparks of heat across her body. Each step brought them nearer, yet the storm seemed to push them even closer, as if the desert itself conspired to intensify the tension between them. They found a small alcove carved naturally into a towering dune, a perfect refuge from the rising wind and sand. Darian dropped the woven mat, and Isabella sank onto it, her hair whipping around her face in chaotic strands. He knelt beside her, the proximity electric, their bodies separated by mere inches but charged with an undeniable, magnetic pull. The first drops of rain fell, fat and warm, sizzling against the sand and mingling with the heat radiating from their skin. Isabella's pulse quickened as Darian leaned closer, brushing a damp lock of hair from her temple, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "Storms have a way of revealing truths," he whispered, his lips almost grazing her ear. "And sometimes, desires we cannot resist." Isabella swallowed hard, feeling the tension coil tighter within her. "Then let the desert reveal us," she whispered back, her voice trembling with anticipation. The wind whipped stronger, and the first hints of rain spattered across their shoulders. Darian's hand slid from hers to rest lightly on her waist, the warmth of his palm a contrast to the cool touch of rain. Every nerve in her body screamed for more, for closer contact, for the surrender she had been both resisting and craving since the first time they met. "You're intoxicating," he murmured, his eyes darkening with unspoken intent. "And the desert, it's never been so alive." Isabella leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the subtle heat that seemed to radiate from him even through layers of linen. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her, a tempest of anticipation and raw, unspoken desire. Each brush of his fingers, each slow, deliberate glance, ignited a fire she could no longer deny. The rain fell harder, drumming against the sand in a hypnotic rhythm, and Darian's hand slid around her back, drawing her closer. The world narrowed to the warmth of his body, the scent of rain mingling with him, and the wild, electric energy crackling between them. Isabella could feel the pull of gravity, not the physical force, but the magnetic attraction that drew them inexorably together. A flash of lightning illuminated the dunes, casting the alcove in stark, fleeting brilliance. In that moment, Darian's lips brushed against hers, soft at first, teasing, a spark of fire against the cool backdrop of rain and wind. Isabella responded instinctively, her hands rising to his shoulders, pulling him closer, the storm outside matching the tempest within. Thunder rumbled in answer, a deep, resonant echo that seemed to shake the very ground. They kissed again, slower this time, more deliberate, the tension and desire mingling into something urgent and uncontainable. The desert storm roared around them, a wild, unrestrained force, and in its chaos, they surrendered to the heat, to the passion, to the temptation that had been building since the first glance across the dunes. Rain soaked their hair, dampened their clothes, but it did nothing to diminish the fire between them. If anything, it heightened it, making every touch, every breath, every glance more electric, more intense, more impossible to resist. The desert had unveiled its power not just through the storm, but through the desire it had nurtured between them. And as the wind tore across the dunes, Darian pressed closer, his lips finding hers with a hunger that matched the storm. Isabella surrendered completely, letting the tempest of rain, wind, and unbridled passion consume them both, the desert night holding them in its wild, intoxicating embrace. The storm passed as abruptly as it had arrived, leaving behind a desert washed clean and shimmering under the silver light of a rising moon. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wet sand and desert blooms. Isabella and Darian emerged from the alcove, their bodies still tingling from the intensity of the night's tempest. The dunes stretched endlessly around them, bathed in pale moonlight, and for a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for what would come next. Darian took her hand, strong and steady, guiding her across the sand toward a hidden oasis he had spoken of earlier. The water glimmered under the moon's glow, surrounded by clusters of palms that swayed gently in the remaining breeze. The oasis was an intimate sanctuary, secluded from the world, a place untouched by human eyes, a perfect retreat where nothing existed but them and the desert night. Isabella sank to her knees at the water's edge, mesmerized by the reflection of the moon rippling across the surface. Darian knelt beside her, the heat of his body radiating against hers, closing the small gap between them. He reached out, tracing a finger lightly along her jaw, then down her neck, his touch deliberate, electrifying. Every nerve in her body hummed at the contact, a thrill she could neither deny nor resist. "You are breathtaking," he murmured, voice low and intimate, carrying a weight that made her chest flutter. "The desert has never held anyone like you." Her pulse raced at his words, and she leaned closer, the tips of their noses nearly touching. "And you," she whispered, "are unlike anyone I've ever met. The desert may have brought us together, but it is you who ignites me." Darian smiled, a slow, knowing curl of his lips that sent a shiver cascading down her spine. He leaned in, capturing her mouth with his own in a kiss that was soft at first, exploratory, then deepened with a growing hunger. Her fingers threaded through his hair, pulling him closer, their bodies aligning with a magnetic inevitability. Each touch, each press of lips, each shared breath seemed to dissolve the boundaries between them, leaving only raw desire and an unspoken understanding. The moonlight danced across the water, casting rippling reflections over their entwined forms. Darian's hands traced the contours of her body gently but possessively, memorizing the feel of her curves, the heat of her skin, the way she responded to his touch. Isabella's breath came in shallow, quickened waves, her body alight with sensation. The world beyond the oasis faded completely, leaving only the intimacy of the moment, the fire that burned between them, and the soft whisper of the palms swaying above. "You surrender easily," he murmured against her lips, his voice husky with desire. "I surrender, to what I want," she admitted, her body pressing closer, seeking the warmth and strength of him. "To the desert, to you, to this moment." Darian's fingers traced gentle patterns along her arms, down her back, and she responded instinctively, tilting her body toward him, her lips finding his again in a kiss that was both tender and consuming. The connection between them deepened, an intoxicating blend of physical longing and emotional intimacy. Every touch, every sigh, every glance conveyed a depth that went beyond simple desire. It was a merging of hearts and bodies, a surrender to something larger than themselves. They moved closer to the water's edge, the soft ripples reflecting the moonlight across their skin. Darian cupped her face in his hands, gazing into her eyes with an intensity that made her knees weaken. "You are fire and water, Isabella," he whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "And I cannot resist you." She rested her forehead against his, letting the heat of their connection overwhelm her, the pulse of the desert echoing in her chest. "Then do not resist," she breathed. "Do not resist us." The night wrapped around them like a silken shroud, holding them in its private, intoxicating embrace. The oasis, with its quiet water and swaying palms, became a world apart, a sanctuary for passion and trust, where they could explore the depths of their desire and the connection that had grown so rapidly between them. Every kiss, Every touch, every whispered word bound them closer, and Isabella felt herself surrendering fully not just to Darien, but to the desert, to the night, to the intoxicating, unrelenting fire that surged between them. And as they lay together by the water, bathed in moonlight and longing, she realized that nothing would ever feel the same again. The desert had revealed not only desire, but intimacy, vulnerability, and a connection that neither could ignore. In the stillness of the oasis, surrounded by moonlight and the scent of the desert after rain, Isabella and Darien gave themselves entirely to the night, to each other, and to a passion that would not be tamed. The first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the desert, brushing the dunes with soft hues of gold and rose. The night had vanished quietly, leaving behind the aftermath of a storm, the sand still glistening with tiny droplets, the oasis shimmering under the early light. Isabella stirred, feeling the warmth of Darien beside her, the steady rhythm of his breath a comforting, exhilarating presence. The desert, so harsh and relentless during the day, now seemed gentle and forgiving, wrapping them in a cocoon of intimacy. She shifted slightly, her fingers tracing the contours of his shoulder, feeling the taut strength beneath the linen still damp from the night's earlier rain. Darien's eyes fluttered open, green and luminous, meeting hers with a gaze that carried both desire and tenderness. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice husky from sleep and passion, curling a smile that made her pulse quicken. "Morning," Isabella replied softly, her lips brushing against his in a fleeting kiss, tentative at first, then lingering as their bodies pressed together instinctively. The desert was quiet, save for the soft ripple of the oasis water and the faint rustle of the palms above, creating a world that belonged only to them. Darien propped himself on one elbow, gazing down at her with an intensity that was both magnetic and disarming. "Last night, the storm, it changed everything," he whispered, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "Not just the desert, Isabella, us." Her heart swelled at his words. She had felt the shift too, the transition from teasing seduction to something deeper, a connection that burned with both desire and emotion. "It did," she agreed, voice barely above a whisper. "And yet, it feels right." He leaned down again, capturing her lips in a kiss that was gentle but laden with the unspoken promises of the night, a kiss that spoke of intimacy, trust, and an unyielding fire between them. She melted against him, every lingering touch, every press of his lips, a confirmation of the connection that had grown between them over the past days. The sun climbed higher, casting shafts of light across the dunes and illuminating the oasis, turning the droplets of water into tiny prisms that reflected the brilliance of the sky. Darien's hands roamed with both reverence and longing, memorizing the curves and planes of her body, the warmth of her skin, the soft tremors that rippled through her at his touch. Isabella surrendered completely, letting desire and tenderness intertwine, each kiss, each caress a dance that had been choreographed by the desert itself. They rose together, bodies pressed close, moving to the edge of the water where the sand was cool and smooth. Darien cupped her face, eyes locking onto hers, as though committing every detail to memory, the sparkle in her eyes, the curve of her lips, the way her breath caught at the brush of his fingers. Isabella felt a shiver of anticipation as his lips trailed from her forehead to her jaw, lingering at her collarbone, and then back to hers. Every movement was deliberate, a slow unveiling of passion tempered by intimacy. The desert around them seemed to hum, a gentle rhythm that matched the steady cadence of their hearts. The storm of the previous night had washed away barriers, leaving only raw, undeniable connection. Isabella wrapped her arms around Darien, pulling him close, and he responded in kind, their bodies moving together with a seamless, natural rhythm. Desire and tenderness mingled as they gave themselves fully to the morning, every kiss, every caress, every whispered word cementing the bond that had grown from playful teasing to intense passion. Finally, they sank to the sand, resting against one another, the oasis reflecting the brilliant hues of sunrise. Darian's fingers stroked her hair as she nestled into his chest, the desert around them vast and eternal, yet utterly private in its embrace. "We've found something rare," he murmured, lips brushing her temple. "Something neither storm nor sand could destroy." Isabella smiled, closing her eyes, letting the warmth of the morning and the closeness of Darian seep into her very soul. "Yes," she whispered, "something wild, something unforgettable." The sun rose fully, bathing the desert in a golden glow. Yet it was not the sun that warmed them, it was the fire between them, a blaze that no storm could extinguish, a connection that would endure long after the dunes returned to their quiet solitude. In the heart of the desert, Isabella and Darian had surrendered to desire, to intimacy, and to the undeniable pull that had drawn them together. And as the morning light danced across the sand and water, they knew their story was not an ending, but a beginning, a blazing, passionate beginning, written in the golden dunes of the desert, where seduction and love had met and merged under the endless sky.